Hi there, just gone 4 o'clock. Welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news for you from 4 until 6. Coming up on today's show, as the Queen sheds a tear at the memorial service to her late husband, the historian David Starkey will tell me if the royal family can survive its current woes. The former Olympic swimmer Sharon Davis will be with me to discuss the cyclist who broke records as a man and now wants to shatter them as a woman. As Moscow shows signs of holding out the olive branch, the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, who was murdered by Russian agents, tells me whether she thinks Putin can be trusted. And Harry Mount, editor of The Oldie, will celebrate a climb down from BT. The telecoms giant says it was wrong to leave old people in rural areas in the lurch by taking away their landlines. Alongside me throughout the show, the wonderful Cathy Gingell. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon, it's just after 4 o'clock and I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest top stories. Her Majesty the Queen has made her first major public appearance since contracting COVID last month. She's attended Prince Philip's memorial service, with Prince Andrew playing a big role walking the Queen through Westminster Abbey. Her Majesty was also joined by other senior members of her family to remember her late husband. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements the Duke of Edinburgh had planned himself for his funeral, but which hadn't been allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. Overseas, Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kyiv and Chernihiv in Ukraine to create the conditions needed for further talks. It follows negotiations in Turkey, which the sanctioned Chelsea FC owner Roman Abramovich attended. He was reportedly poisoned during talks in Kyiv early this month, prompting Ukraine's foreign minister to advise his team not to eat or drink anything during their time there. A Ukrainian negotiator says enough progress has now been made to warrant a meeting between the two sides.
Intensive consultations are underway right now on some of the most important issues, the most important of which is the agreement on international security guarantees for Ukraine, because with this agreement we will be able to end the war as Ukraine needs. The second, very important issue is a ceasefire to solve all the humanitarian problems that have accumulated. They all need an immediate solution.
Well, Ukraine's President Zelensky has told the Danish parliament that over 100,000 people are still stranded in the southern port city of Mariupol. His comments came as new video emerged showing Russian tanks with Z markings heading towards the besieged city. Addressing the Danish parliament, President Zelensky called for tougher sanctions against Moscow.
We appeal to you and to the whole democratic world. The sanctions against Russia have to be strengthened. You must refrain from Russian oil. You must block trade with the Russian Federation. You must close your ports to Russian ships. This has to be the common policy of the European Union, of all the member countries.
Meanwhile, a Russian strike on an administration building in the port city of Mykolaiv has been captured on CCTV. Local officials saying 7 people were killed in that explosion and 22 were injured. Rescue workers are still sifting through the rubble after the regional headquarters was targeted. Here, a £38 million super yacht has been seized by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, which is currently docked at Canary Wharf in London, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Russian ships were banned from UK ports at the start of this month. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 of its staff was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the chief executive said complying with the government's request to rehire the fired workers could cause the company to collapse. He told MSPs the minimum wage will be paid to all workers if the law is changed.
The route that runs between Scotland and Northern Ireland as a domestic route, we are required to pay national minimum wage, and we do pay national minimum wage, and we will continue to pay national minimum wage. And if that were extended elsewhere, we will completely comply with it. And this has not been about rates of pay. This has been about a fundamentally different model.
Peter Hebblethwaite there. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for lockdown breaching at parties in Downing Street. The Metropolitan Police say they'll be referred to the Acro Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out the fines. A dozen events were investigated, and the Prime Minister is thought to have attended as many as 6 events. Scotland Yard says there could be more referrals too in the future. A missing teenager's school is renewing calls for help to find him. 14-year-old Rashid El Safi Bakar disappeared from his home in northwest London over a week ago. Police say it's completely out of character for him to leave, and there's growing concern for his well-being. Landlords who provide substandard social housing are set to be publicly named and shamed as part of plans to improve landlord services. Ministers also want to set up a resident panel so tenants can share their concerns directly with them. The government says it wants to halve the number of non-decent rented homes by 2030. Households across the UK are being encouraged to count the plastic packaging they throw away in a week as part of a campaign to tackle waste. The Big Plastic Count is being run to highlight how much plastic waste is leaving UK homes and how much is actually recycled. Campaigners want the government to commit to halving the UK's single-use plastic by 2025. Those are your top stories here on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, but now it's back to Brazier.
Hi there, 7 minutes past 4. Welcome to Brazier. We spent a lot of time yesterday afternoon talking about the actor Will Smith. We won't do quite as much, anything like as much today, but we will start with this story. Yes, the American actor Will Smith has apologised to the comic Chris Rock, who he struck and swore at during that live Oscar ceremony. There it is, in Hollywood yesterday. Rock, as you may remember, had made a joke at the expense of Smith's wife, who was present at the awards ceremony and who has alopecia, which Rock ridiculed. In a statement published on Instagram, Smith wrote, "I would like to publicly apologise to you, Chris. I was out of line and I was wrong. I am embarrassed and my actions were not indicative of the man I want to be. There is no place for violence in a world of love and kindness." And so on. Well, the Smith slap has provoked some discussion. A writer in The Guardian today wrote that the backlash against the actor was rooted in anti-blackness, while alopecia campaigners have said the condition should not be subject to mockery. It's not clear what effect, if any, the incident will have on Smith's career. Well, joining me from Los Angeles is Paul Duddridge, host of the Politics People podcast. Paul, welcome to you. Thanks for joining us. I'm guessing maybe California's just beginning to wake up today, but on the East Coast, they've been publishing stuff about this for a while. What's the vibe today? What's the spirit of forgiveness or otherwise?
Well, I think you've just described it very well. I think that the opinion is split, and it's just a variety of different forms of support. Some of the alopecia groups, some people framing this as a racial situation. I think it's actually moved on from being the public assault that it was. It's now become a talking point, like it's a political issue. Chris Rock was assaulted on global television, and it's being processed in Hollywood. Hollywood, never underestimate the hypocrisy of Hollywood, and I'm sure you never would. I mean, we did actually have in 2003 the standing ovation for Roman Polanski. Yeah. Who, no matter what anybody thinks about anybody else in gossip and rumors about other stars, he actually skipped bail in 1978 to avoid sentencing. So that's like, there's no conjecture about his criminality at all. Standing ovation. Harrison Ford received his Best Picture Oscar on his behalf. So Hollywood has a very good way, if you like, of prioritizing celebrity. And Los Angeles, Hollywood, etc., it prioritizes celebrity and status above all else. The chatter this morning is that the apology, I'm sure it was sincere, let's give him the benefit of the doubt, but it's coming with an understanding that Will Smith will be suspended from the academy, but he won't be expelled.
Do you think, Paul, I mean, maybe this apology he's offered up is wholly sincere. Maybe his agent got in his ear and said, look, Will, if you want to do all the films you're planning on doing this year and next, it might be a good time to appear a little bit humble and contrite. I mean, does he run the risk of at least a partial cancellation for this?
No, I don't think so. No, I think he's one of the stars that's uncancelable, partly because, look, the way that the media is atomized over the last decade has made it possible for people to have careers, parallel careers, if you like. So even if you are, in one way cancelled by the mainstream, he's got plenty of other outlets. I mean, it's interesting how quickly this has turned into, you can't cancel him because you can't cancel a black man for doing stuff that white guys have been doing at the ceremony for the last 90 years, apparently. And so I think that the whole thing, to some degree, look at Jussie Smollett. I mean, this is the thing, Jussie Smollett actually banged to rights, and there's still debate over him. So because we have an atomized media, people are still nostalgic for the Oscars, like they used to be the gold standard, semi-literally, of the film industry. They were the arbiter, the barometer. Getting an Oscar actually meant something 20 years ago. 9 million viewers last year, with 50% increase in ratings this year because of this incident partly. It's still only a third of the viewers they were getting 20 years ago. So the significance of any of these decision makers, any of these kind of any of these great cultural icons that we grew up with, their significance is gone. Look, the Golden Globes doesn't even really exist anymore. Yeah. And we didn't even have an incident like this. We just had Ricky's speech. It's the atomizing of the media, basically. And you can see some of that playing out here. The thing that really galls me is that there's the Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife, has a show, The Red Table Talk, that is a very successful digital show. And they've talked at length about their, should we say, casual relationship. I don't want to get into details, but basically they've talked at length about their relationship on a very intimate level that would be unthinkable from a Hollywood icon 20 years ago. So I think this is just a reflection on the fact that there is no central police enforcer in the world of media anymore. Everything's atomized. You find your own audience. If anybody attempted to cancel Will Smith, he'd carry on being one of the most famous people in the world still, and would be able to generate, I mean, good Lord, he could just make films anywhere in the world that he wanted. So there's nobody to cancel anymore, is what I'm saying.
Paul, you say it really well. Absolutely fascinating. Paul Duddridge joining us there from Los Angeles. We'll talk to him again, I'm sure, if not necessarily about this story. My presenter's guest today, Cathy Gingell, is alongside me. Been following this story. I make no apologies for making it our lead story today. There are more important things going on in the world, obviously. There are many people who will say it was just a slap. I was struck yesterday, I remain struck by the fact that there were the great and the good of Hollywood in the audience. And when, after slapping somebody, 20 minutes later, Will Smith goes up to get his award, there was nary a boo in the house. A flock of sheep.
Well, exactly. I think why it is important. It's symbolic of the way identity politics has come to trump the rule of law, effectively. And once we get into that, we're going to get into mob rule of whichever particular mob is the strongest, and that's what basically was shown up last night. It is absolutely quite true. If a white man had done that, there would have been an assault charge brought on him. He would have had his career ended.
Can you say that with conviction?
I say that with absolute conviction. If it had been Dominic Cumberbatch, if it had been any other white actor, I can't think of the names off the top of my head. That is not just that would have been the end of them. There would have probably been a criminal assault charge. Are we going to have a rule of law that discriminates on colour? This is ridiculous. I mean, admittedly, in Los Angeles, there's violence going on all the time and the police are hopeless. And maybe it is also reflective of a chaotic lawless Los Angeles culture. But much more worrying is your point about how the mob will go with whichever identity group they think is the strongest. And that's not right. OK,
Cathy, for now. We'll move on to what I think we all agree is the much more important story, has been for weeks now, and will, I dare say, persist in being for some time yet. And first signs today, perhaps, of Russia willing to give ground in Ukraine in pursuit of a negotiated settlement. The Russian Deputy Defense Minister said Moscow would, quote, radically reduce military activity around two cities, Chernihiv, as well as the capital, Kiev. The minister said the aim of the announcement was to increase trust between both sides. Well, joining me now is Major General Chip Chapman. Chip Chapman, welcome to you. What did you make of this statement from the Russians?
Well, I think it's a statement of reality to where they stand in the campaign. That is that the strategy bridge between the political intent and the military power which the Russians brought to bear has been seen to be wanted. And therefore, they have to look at finding a way within their means to achieve desired ends, and they're changing that end, saying that they're concentrating on the Donbass. So they had too many axes, they had too many groupings of forces which they couldn't sustain. So I've talked before about culminating points, and there are certain parts of the Russian military which have culminated, and that has led to this rowing back of their expectations for the future. And what's important about the announcement is actually not the part about potentially going towards a ceasefire, but it is to do with a peace treaty, because that is what you want. There's really two parts. The first one is the human security need, stop killing people, restore services, allow refugees back. And the second one is what we call normative security. That is the need for a peace settlement, which may not be to everyone's liking on both sides, rather like the Good Friday Agreement in '98. It's good enough if it annoys everyone in a way. And that's what we'll probably get to, hopefully, in the next 1 or 2 weeks.
There's video footage. I mean, like a lot of video footage, you can't absolutely vouch for its provenance, but it purports to show Russian soldiers today raising the Russian flag over the town hall in Mariupol. And if that's true, and if they have gained control of Mariupol, this idea, which, Chip, you're suggesting that they maybe disengage a little bit from the north and focus more on that ribbon of territory they've got in the south and obviously on the Donbass and the east. We can see it in that context, perhaps. Progress in the south, withdrawal in the north.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think they'll prioritise two things. Firstly, of course, the Donbass, of which they occupied a third before the war in terms of the little green men, and then their expectation of a land bridge towards the Crimea, which Mariupol is the key towards that. But I think we also need to look at why fighting stops and also why fighting doesn't stop. And fighting stops because of unacceptable costs, either moral, military, political, or economic, and a realisation that there is an improbability of victory. Now, certainly in this sense at the moment, there is this improbability of victory. But if you reverse that coin and ask why fighting doesn't stop, one of the reasons is that leaders fear a loss of their power base. So Putin must have something from his perspective to come out of this, and he needs a sufficient victory to justify the cost or sacrifice already incurred. Now, if you're a widow in Russia, I don't think you'll be saying you're a special operations widow. You'll be saying you're a war widow. So he needs to do something, try and restore his credibility, or otherwise we'll be in a territory which Biden mentioned about this guy must go from power, because militaries which lose generally don't have their political parties or head of state in power after the succession of the campaign.
Chip Chapman, as always, thanks very much indeed for your time. The thoughts of Cathy Gingell, who's alongside me here. Prospects for a negotiated settlement. I was saying to somebody this morning, actually, there was this line from Zelensky's office that he's prepared to consider peace, but there'd have to be a referendum first. And the suggestion was that's a reminder that just because we think Zelensky's the man, there are people in Ukraine who've maybe lost people, they've committed a lot to this war, who are not going to take a peace plan. Oh, no. But it's a reminder, actually, that every time Zelensky pops up somewhere around the world getting applause, it burnishes his authority. And the more authority he has, the more likely he can negotiate a peace deal, maybe.
I don't know. I see this rather differently from practically everybody else. He looks a desperate man to me, Zelensky. He has got, how many is it now? 4 million people have fled the country, 3.5, 4 million. Whatever the halt in the Russian campaign is, and whatever their failures, they've created a lot of rubble. There are a lot of deaths. The crisis isn't just in Russia with sanctions. The crisis is in Ukraine. He strikes me as a man over the last few weeks who's very much wanted to talk to Russia and to get a deal. And, in a way, I see him as, who is he puppet of? Is he the puppet of the US or is he the puppet of Russia? I feel very sorry for him. He cannot sleep at night. He must be terrified. Whether he has authority in the country, I don't know. It'll depend on the Ukrainian oligarchs, no doubt, who are running him, as has always been the case in Ukrainian history. It's an unhappy country. But I desperately hope that they'll get on with these talks and that actually the Ukrainians and the Russians will be allowed to try and sort it out themselves. But as you say, it's very difficult. Has Zelensky got the authority to bring it off?
We're going to be talking to Marina Litvinenko shortly. It's a question I'm sure she's got an answer to. Kathy, for now, thanks very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, as I say, the widow of the murdered Russian dissident Alexander Litvinenko joins me to discuss those claims that there was an attempted poisoning on the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. But first, we'll bring you the weather.
Hello again. Things turning an awful lot colder over the next few days. Icy in places, and yes, some spots could see some snow, particularly during Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Here's the reason why. A cold front is slowly drifting southwards. As it wriggles and ripples, we could see some snow during tomorrow evening and overnight, and then it clears away, meaning that we're all in the cold air by Thursday. Let's get back to the rest of today, however, because the cold air is pushing into the far north. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place here for the wintry showers overnight. It could turn quite icy. Mostly rain in this zone heading south across southern Scotland into northern England. The showers in the south fading. Temperatures here close to average, but further north with the colder air, there will be a pretty extensive frost across Scotland to start Wednesday. Still potentially icy across northern Scotland with more snow showers coming in here. Mixture of sleet and hail at low levels. Certainly some snow over the higher routes. And then this zone of wet weather sinking south through the day, so a dull damp start for Northern Ireland, Northern England, turning brighter later. The rain pushing into the Midlands and East Anglia, maybe turning to snow over hills in Northern England. Brighter conditions in the southwest, still quite mild here, but some afternoon showers, 12 or 13. Elsewhere, a big change, just 7 in Belfast compared to temperature in the teens here during today. The colder air continues to track southwards, and this is the area of concern during Wednesday evening and overnight. An area of wet weather across the Midlands, southern England, South Wales that could provide some snow, certainly over hills, but even to lower levels for a time that may still be around on Thursday morning. So you may wake up to a covering across some surfaces on Thursday morning. It could be icy as well. That does tend to move out of the way, and then we're left with some wintry showers in the east. Again, a mixture of sleet, hail and some snow, and some spells of sunshine, particularly in the west. But look at the temperatures come Thursday. 20 degrees last week. By Thursday, 5 to 8, and feeling colder when you add on that wind.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
At 25 minutes past 4, if you thought the Roman Abramovich story was over, do think again. If you believe the billionaire would no longer feature in news bulletins because his ownership of Chelsea Football Club was cut short by sanctions, you'll have to reconsider that, because Abramovich is emerging as a key figure in fledgling efforts to establish peace in Ukraine. He was pictured today. That's not the picture, obviously. That's an old picture. Apologies if you're listening on radio, as usual. But take my word for it. He was pictured today at negotiations in Istanbul, sitting next to the official spokesman for the Turkish president. He's said to have been shuttling between Kiev and Moscow, acting as an intermediary. And it seems at some personal risk. According to the Wall Street Journal, Abramovich may have been poisoned along with Ukrainian negotiators. He's said to have suffered sore eyes and peeling skin, but has since recovered. While it's not clear whether this poisoning, if that's what it was the work of Russian agents, or indeed whether Abramovich was the intended target, it does conjure up inevitably memories of fatal poisonings ordered by Moscow, most notably the killing of Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned by tea laced with polonium in London. I'm amazed it's this long ago, in 2006. His widow, of course, is Marina Litvinenko, who joins me now. Marina Litvinenko, appreciating your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Your thoughts about what's happened to Roman Abramovich?
Very good afternoon. I don't know, I'm very surprised why it's every time Roman Abramovich became like a newsmaker. Like months ago, we all talking about his assets and would be Chelsea sold or would be he able to collect money. Now we're all talking about was he poisoned or not. For me, it's always like some kind of distractions. Every time when we need to talk about something serious, we have to talk about Abramovich. And this makes me feel a little bit skeptical for what happened to him, because if it happened 3rd of March, and now we know about this almost in 3 weeks, even we don't have any evidence if he was poisoned and he received these all symptoms immediately, why it was not taking as a picture on a phone. We had it something from Bellingcat, or even it's not looking as a serious poison. And what you exactly said, it might be pretending to make him feel suffered and not to push him for sanctions or maybe make him feel easy. It's one way we might explain all this situation. And another one, I would say, might be Ukraine as a state. Somebody tried to frame it. Because just the days before, 3rd of March, it was a lot of discussion about Ukraine as a country having chemical weapons, producing biological and everything what illegal. And now when Abramovich was in Ukraine, he was actually poisoned. Who might be responsible? Ukraine. How is this a responsible and unsafe place to be?
Marina Litvinenko, I mean, as you say, it's so murky, it's so hard to know really what's going on. I mean, as you say, Bellingcat, Wall Street Journal, this isn't stuff from the wilder shores of conspiracy theory land. These are, as reliable journalistic sources. But as you say, we can't really know what's going on, or indeed what agendas may be at work. But what we can say with absolute conviction, because we've literally just seen pictures of it, is Roman Abramovich sitting next to the Turkish president's spokesman at these peace talks in Istanbul. And if you are somebody who follows the news and for whom, Abramovich is just that oligarch, fabulously wealthy, yachts, Chelsea, you're puzzled. Why on earth is he involved in this process?
Yes, and I'm still quite uncertain who he is really represented. Even it was asked and saying he represents Zelensky, is it true? Or what he allowed to be in the side of Vladimir Putin? I will remind you another story. It was saying Abramovich became a postman for last day. He brought a letter from Vladimir Zelensky to Vladimir Putin with some kind of agreements, and Vladimir Putin disagreed, and he just didn't follow what Vladimir Zelensky asked. Why Abramovich became a postman between two presidents? This is another question, and I'm really surprised why people try to allow to businessmen who actually has a lot of questions to his business.
Yeah.
Became this a peacemaker and postman.
He's clearly, is he a postman or is he a man with real clout and connections? He's definitely got connections, that's for sure. We'll maybe find out in time. Marina Litvinenko, appreciate your time.
But maybe I have some another things picture to Abramovich. When was this trial in 2012 between Roman Abramovich and Boris Berezovsky, and we know Boris Berezovsky lost, but it was a lot of explain how this business was raised by Abramovich. And I think even after this, knowledge about his money was more than enough to understand what the man you're dealing with. And now it takes another years to realize and put him under sanctions.
Good. It's an interesting point, and the sanctions questions remain, don't they? We will, I'm sure, get to the bottom of who's been sanctioned for exactly how much and why when the dust settles on the war in Ukraine, we hope at least. Marina Litvinenko, thanks again for your time. Kathy's alongside me.
Well, that was fascinating.
It's a murky one, though, isn't it? Why
it's fascinating. I'll throw something else into the mix. I mean, for a while, I think Bennett, who's the Prime Minister of Israel, have I got the name right, was acting as some sort of go-between or mediator. Well, we also know that Abramovich is a huge philanthropist in Israel. And so presumably there is some blowback on him with sanctions on what he's on his sort of £1 million projects.
Does it matter if you take the view that actually all that really matters is that the bloodletting on an industrial scale currently going on right now today in Ukraine stops? It doesn't matter who brings off the peace deal. It may even not matter what their motives are. What matters is people stop killing each other.
Well, of course it is, but of course people are looking out for themselves too. But I mean, if he can fulfill that role, the sooner peace is brought in Ukraine, it cannot come soon enough. The deaths must stop, killing must stop. So to that extent, if he's an effective, albeit businessman, albeit less pure than the driven snow, which no doubt how many of them are as pure as the driven snow, none of them, so much the better. Maybe he has got talents as a negotiator.
I know that look. Kathy, I know that look. Kathy Kinchell, more from Kathy a little later on. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, it's our daily debate. We're asking today, was the royal tour of the Caribbean a turning point for the institution of British monarchy? Those images of Will and Kate in that Land Rover have divided opinion. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, was asked yesterday about it. He said they were odd. Are they a harmless nod to history, a bit of Netflix The Crown, or something of an ugly colonial throwback? We'll debate that. First, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Just after 4:30, the Queen and other senior members of the royal family have been paying tribute today to the late Prince Philip at a special memorial service in London. Her Majesty was accompanied by her son, Prince Andrew, from Windsor Castle, who also walked her through Westminster Abbey. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements the Duke of Edinburgh had planned himself, but hadn't been allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kyiv and Chernihiv in Ukraine to create the conditions needed for further talks. It follows negotiations in Turkey. The sanctioned Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich attended. A Ukrainian negotiator says enough progress has now been made to warrant a meeting of the two sides. And here, a £38 million super yacht has been seized by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, named Fee, docked at Canary Wharf, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 staff was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the chief executive said complying with the government's request to rehire the fired workers could cause the company to collapse. And he told MSPs the minimum wage will be paid to all workers if the law is changed. Downing Street insisted the Prime Minister didn't mislead Parliament when he told them no lockdown rules had been breached, despite a police investigation finding the law had been broken. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for the parties which were held during lockdown at Downing Street. The Met Police says they'll be referred to the Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out fines. Those are your headlines on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. We'll have more from Brazier after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
"22 minutes to 5. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge for riding through Jamaica, or part of Jamaica, in that, again, apologies if listening on the radio, open-top Land Rover, saying the symbolism harked of the past. He said it was odd, as a photo opportunity goes. The Labour leader branded Will and Kate's decision to ride in the vehicle, also used by the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh nearly 70 years ago, a bit odd. It may be a significant moment when the leader of Her Majesty's opposition breaks with protocol to offer a critical view of the future head of state in quite this way. And it comes after sustained criticism of the tour, which a vociferous group of critics said looked increasingly anachronistic and out of touch. So, on the day when we saw the Queen at Westminster Abbey, looking frail, and emotional at one stage, we'll reflect on that story with David Starkey at the top of this hour. Does Sir Keir Starmer have a point? Might it be that Meghan and Harry, with their soft focus, I can feel Kathy Gintle's hackles rising right next to me, Harry and Meghan, with their soft focus social media platitudes, maybe they offer a model for monarchy that should be copied after all? Our debate today then, was the Caribbean Royal Tour a turning point for the British monarchy? Joining me for this debate, Amy Nichol, the author and commentator, and Sunil Sharma, who is Chief Operating Officer at Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth. And the first time I've talked to Sunil, so we'll start with you, if you don't mind, Sunil Sharma, on this one. Was the Caribbean Tour a turning point, or just another successful royal tour as far as you're concerned?
Good afternoon. I don't think it necessarily is a turning point at all. I don't think it will be the first time the royal tours run into difficulties, and I don't think it will be the last. I think, if anything, it highlights the sort of changes that's going on across the world in relation to the conversation on monarchy. We saw it in Australia in the 90s, where it ended up being a referendum which they voted in favour of keeping the monarchy. So I don't see it as a massive turning point. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the monarchy and Commonwealth and the role it plays. I think that the majority are republics. 5 even have their own monarchs. So I don't necessarily see this as a massive change.
Amy Nicole, if we can just start with the photograph we're introducing, and many of our viewers will have seen it, our listeners I'm sure have seen it too, in the Land Rover. It was, shades of 1950s pith helmets and dusty airports in days of empire. There was something slightly retro about what they were wearing almost, but they were in the Land Rover because the Jamaican army said that's where they wanted them. It's an efficient way of showing a couple of people to a large crowd safely. They were told what to do.
I think that this whole tour has been a charm offensive with very little charm, and it's been a total own goal for the royal family. And I think the photo that you've highlighted today is just adding more reason to how that the criticism is going to be laid on for the royal tour. And I hate that it's happened today, when we've seen Prince Philip's memorial service and the beautiful imagery of the Queen. And it has to be said that the service that she has contributed to the country will never ever be recreated. And I think that this is a turning point. The Queen's coming to the end of her life, I think it's safe to say, and the current state of the royal family with the younger royals, and particularly highlighted by the royal tour, this is a turning point for the worse. And it's been a nod to a bad history. And I think it's the first time that the country has spoken openly about what really happened with the Caribbean legacy. Usually we'll hear things like, we leave it to the country to sort it out. Now we're having real conversations about the moral, ethical, legal case for reparations. For the first time, I don't think we've had that discussion really before in this country.
We've had it. I mean, we are not this country, but this news channel spent plenty of time deliberating the rights and wrongs and the practicalities of how on earth you would decide who gets what from whom on several occasions. Sunil Sharma, can I just come back to you? I just want to deal with Amy's point about the Commonwealth and its sustainability from here on in. There are those, Claire Foges in The Times yesterday, who describes herself as a monarchist, said it's time to wind it up now. It just serves as a cover for some quite dodgy regimes in the world, giving them respectability, and the idea that it gives Britain any kind of soft power, that's for the birds.
Yeah, I think I pretty much strongly disagree with that. I think often where we're seeing a lot of the criticisms with the Commonwealth, it typically tends to be people, generally typically white British people, who seem to have a problem or an issue with the Commonwealth, largely centred London, around the areas, upper middle class people. But if you actually speak to people from these nations like we do on a regular basis, you see the appetite is very strong. Jamaica's a very good example. If you watch when the Prince and Princess were with Raheem Sterling playing football, and they had fences around the football pitch, and you saw the hundreds and thousands of people around those fences, and you saw when the Prince and Princess walked over the fences, you saw massive groups of people run towards them. So I think sometimes it's something that as Brits we seem to make this decision that we should feel bad and guilty, but those countries are in this. They decide to be a part of this, right? Like, we saw South Africa who left the Commonwealth and then rejoined. So I think sometimes, I think a lot of the criticism that's actually labelled towards the royal family, the monarchy, the Commonwealth comes from us. And I think if you actually go, you look at the world's largest democracy in India, they chose to be a part of the Commonwealth after going independent.
Okay, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. Amy Nicole, nobody's forcing any of these Commonwealth countries to be subservient to the UK or be in the Commonwealth at the point of a sword or gun.
When you look at somebody like Prince William doing a tour of the Caribbean, this is somebody that is the head of an institution that has benefited directly from the legacy of the slave trade. And if you think with what Sunil said about only one half of people having the conversation, it's two halves. It's the legacy of the slave owners and the legacy of the people who were involved in slavery.
What would you have them do, Amy? What would you have them do? Assuming you're right about them being these massive beneficiaries of the slave trade, what would you have them do?
Something that I think has been really interesting that has come up from this whole discussion is the fact that slave owners and plantation owners were paid compensation, until 2015. We have always compensated and given reparations to the people, such as the Jewish community following World War II. The fact that the people who were victims of the slave trade have never received any reparations is criminal, and it's wrong, and it should be considered illegal, and I'm sure it will be eventually. And that's what this whole debate has thrown up.
Well, OK, Sunil Sharma, OK, Amy's introducing a topic which we've discussed many times here, and it's not clearly there's massive disagreement about reparations, the principle, how far you go back, how do you distinguish between somebody who's a black Briton who's from Nigeria or from the Caribbean, whether it's moral to take money from poor white people in Britain and give it to richer people with Caribbean heritage. We're going to park that because clearly it's controversial. You say the Commonwealth still has a role. The Royals have decided that Prince Charles will still be the next head of our Commonwealth. Is that a mistake? Is it time for Britain to relinquish control of the Commonwealth?
I don't think so. And I think we have to let the people of the Commonwealth decide. I think we're engaging in debate here, and I would love to see what's being talked about in the other Commonwealth countries. And sometimes I feel like we want to feel guilty, or we want to talk about, talking about slavery, reparations, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that the British High Commission to Jamaica summed it up perfectly, which is sometimes when it comes to direct, requests for reparations from government to government, the reason why it doesn't prosper because who do you pay it for? Because the people who are harmed directly by it are no longer here. And where do you draw the line? Do you start to talk about the princes of these countries who sold the slaves? Should we demand reparations from them? I don't think there's a country or a region in existence, a religion that hasn't benefited or somehow been involved in slavery. So now all of a sudden to decide Britain as a country should be the country that we all decide to persecute for slavery when we were one of the first countries to abolish it, I don't think that's fair. I think there are some bigger issues right now that's going on in the world where slavery still exists in 2022, not in our country and in other countries. I think those are debates that we should be having. We should, I think we universally accept in this country slavery is wrong. We should not be doing it. It was not a good period of history, but it's still actually going on across the world. And rather than us talk about the past, I think it's important we take a stand on what's going on in the present. And I think have these conversations with the Commonwealth countries, because speak to them and they would tell you that they're happy to be part of the Commonwealth. And if they're not, they leave. And if they're not happy with the Queen as the head of state, she's not the head of the state, hence why she's only the head of state for 15 countries. And if they choose Prince Charles, should not be a head of state for those countries, and they can decide, like they have done in the other remaining Commonwealth countries where they don't have the Queen as head of state.
Amy Nicole, there's the point being raised about how far you go back, that the people who lived under the yoke of slavery are no longer alive. You can argue, I'm sure you will, their descendants still are. There are lots of people who can argue their descendants still are. So, no, hang on, let me finish my question. That's the way it works. I mean, I got an email yesterday from somebody saying to me, well, look, you might as well go back to the harrowing of the North by the Romans 1,000 years ago. There is still evidence suggesting that the north of England is poorer than the south of England because of the Norman oppression, the harrowing of the North. How far do you want to go back? Where does it stop?
I think when you look at the royal family and the way that they are continuing to benefit from the legacy of this, then by taking out that we have very little social mobility in this country. It's one of the biggest problems that we face. And while we continue to make the rich richer and just the poor stagnate, I think this is all related to what we're talking about today. But in essence, what it does show with everything we've just discussed is the pointlessness and the out of touch reality that is the royal family. Why do we need them? What's the point of the royal family now? And how are we benefiting in any way from having them?
Well, on those questions, on that note, we're going to finish it there. Amy Nicol and Sunil Sharma, thanks both very much indeed for an enlightening conversation. Amy Nicol was just wondering there, does it have a future? She thinks not. We've got a poll at the moment. 2/3 of you say God save King Charles. A third of you, though, are saying the institution ought to wind up after the Queen has gone. There's the poll. And a fraction of you think it's time to scrap the royal family straight away. Keep your votes coming in. Cathy Gingell, just time for you briefly.
Well, tradition is terribly important, and it's not just important for our country, it is actually important for all the countries in the Commonwealth, and it's a multicultural Commonwealth. It's diverse. We have people talking about the need for diversity all the time. What could be more diverse than the Commonwealth? As Sunil said, it's up to them to choose who their head is. And if tradition's so important for people's sense of belonging, for their identity, for their well-being. I can well believe that outside the British media sniping, that trip was a huge success. And William and Kate have worked extraordinarily hard. They work so hard not putting one foot wrong. And the idea that the lady said that they just somehow benefit from this, I don't think many of us have been up to that type of self-restraint and trying to do the right
you know what,
thing
Cathy?
over those times.
They've got a lifetime of it to look
and
forward to.
they've got a lifetime
as well.
of it, and I take my hat off to them.
If you had one.
If I had one.
Thanks, Cathy. Keep your votes coming in on that poll. We've got Dr. David Starkey reflecting on the future of the monarchy at the top of the next hour. In the meantime, here's the weather.
Hello again. Things turning an awful lot colder over the next few days. Icy in places, and yes, some spots could see some snow, particularly during Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Here's the reason why. A cold front is slowly drifting southwards. As it wriggles and ripples, we could see some snow during tomorrow evening and overnight, and then it clears away, meaning that we're all in the cold air by Thursday. Let's get back to the rest of today, however, because the cold air is pushing into the far north. And we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place here for the wintry showers overnight. It could turn quite icy. Mostly rain in this zone heading south across southern Scotland into northern England. The showers in the south fading. Temperatures here close to average, but further north with the colder air, there will be a pretty extensive frost across Scotland to start Wednesday. Still potentially icy across northern Scotland with more snow showers coming in here. Mixture of sleet and hail at low levels. Certainly some snow over the higher routes. And then this zone of wet weather sinking south through the day, so a dull damp start for Northern Ireland, Northern England, turning brighter later. The rain pushing into the Midlands and East Anglia, maybe turning to snow over hills in Northern England. Brighter conditions in the southwest, still quite mild here, but some afternoon showers, 12 or 13. Elsewhere, a big change, just 7 in Belfast compared to temperature in the teens here during today. The colder air continues to track southwards, and this is the area of concern during Wednesday evening and overnight. An area of wet weather across the Midlands, southern England, South Wales that could provide some snow, certainly over hills, but even to lower levels for a time that may still be around on Thursday morning. So you may wake up to a covering across some surfaces on Thursday morning. It could be icy as well. That does tend to move out of the way, and then we're left with some wintry showers in the east. Again, a mixture of sleet, hail, and some snow. And some spells of sunshine, particularly in the west. But look at the temperatures come Thursday. 20 degrees last week. By Thursday, 5 to 8, and feeling colder when you add on that wind.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. You can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're on the money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, has the latest COVID surge peaked, and should we still care at this stage in the pandemic? Assuming we're still in a pandemic. I mean, there's a question we didn't think we'd be asking this year. UK cases fell by some 5% over the course of the weekend, in another sign that this latest wave could be very short-lived indeed. And not all that long ago, we had a press conference every time those rates went up. So perhaps it's worth highlighting the good news when it comes, as well as the grim stuff. Joining me now is NHS doctor, Dr. Tolu Adepeju, who's here with us in the studio, and delighted to say, Tolu, thanks for coming in, appreciate it. We're left with an impression, we look at the statistics, that we're moving into a post-pandemic phase. You're at the sharp end, what are you seeing?
I'd say definitely in terms of the infection rates, they are dropping in comparison to last year. So essentially last year, this time last year, they were a lot higher. Obviously, we were a lot more worried about it, which is why the free testing started, things like that. But now, compared to what they were last year, obviously they are dropping, which is obviously good, positive, moving in the right direction, which is definitely what we want to see.
And in terms of, we've drawn attention repeatedly with people like Carol Sikora to the fact that actually, look, guys, don't obsess too much about rates, be far more focused on hospitalisations and therefore, as a consequence, death tolls as well. And if you look at hospitalisations, even in Scotland, where things have been really bad recently, actually the death rate is pretty, every death's a tragedy, etc. But actually, compared to where we were, we're in a much better place.
Yeah, in terms of the hospitalisation, compared to last year, last year we were, like you said before, press conference when everything was increasing, it was really bad. But now, obviously, it's still bad. Obviously, every death that we get from COVID is not, no one wants any deaths from COVID, but it is moving in the right direction, which is obviously the most important thing.
And what about, the big questions now for people when they're looking at the National Health Service, the backlog of things like elective operations, just trying to see a GP? What are you seeing? Are you having to do a lot of apologising to patients who can't see you face to face?
Well, no, yeah, it is. Unfortunately, the backlog is something that was kind of there before COVID. Obviously, because of COVID, it has gotten a lot worse. But I think, obviously, we're trying to come up with new plans in order to tackle that. Because I think the most important thing is working in the right direction and trying, obviously, with the public's help, and trying to ask for that, that kind of apologies and letting them know that obviously we are trying our best, because COVID, as you can imagine, knocked a lot of things in NHS out of sorts.
Is everybody still people are still wearing face masks on NHS?
Of course,
sites?
yeah, of course, yeah. No.
Kathy, you
well, there's not much. I'm sure for doctors and proper, fully medical cases, that I'm asking you when you're doing surgical work in an operation. But the scientific evidence, and this is published and it's across the world now, is that they really make very little difference. They just make people run scared. Rather like a lot of the testing made people run scared, because you could test positive but be entirely asymptomatic. That's happened to me once anyway. Well, I'm an outlier, I suppose. I'm not vaccinated. I've never caught COVID. Well, the one time I tested positive, my children rang up every day. Are you all right, Mum? Are you dying? I said, shut up, I'm fine. Go away, leave me alone. I'm running up and downstairs, So I just don't know. I just think so much has been
Kathy,
built up.
is this a question?
Sorry.
We've only got the 15 seconds left,
sorry,
and Tolu's got a train to catch.
Stop. You've got. Yeah, I'm sorry. Shut up, Kathy.
We're almost out of time, but Tolu, really appreciate you coming in. And there is a general sense, isn't there, that we are entering that post-COVID world. Fingers crossed, it remains that way. Thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much.
And much more from Kathy Gingell throughout the course of the hour. Don't apologise. It's why you're here. It's 5 o'clock.
I've got to do.
And coming up live at 5, as the Queen sheds a tear at the memorial service to her late husband, the historian David Starkey will tell me if the royal family can survive its current woes. The former Olympic swimmer Sharon Davis will be with me to discuss the cyclist who broke records as a man and now wants to shatter them as a woman. And Harry Mount, editor of The Oldie, will celebrate a climb down from BT. The telecom giant says it was wrong to leave old people in rural areas in the lurch by taking away their landlines. Alongside me throughout the show, the wonderful Kathy Gingell. But first, we have the headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Just after 5, your headlines this hour. The Queen and other senior members of the royal family have been paying tribute to the late Prince Philip at a memorial service in London. Her Majesty was accompanied by her son, Prince Andrew, from Windsor Castle, who also then walked her through Westminster Abbey. The service of thanksgiving featured elements the Duke of Edinburgh had planned for himself for his own funeral, but which hadn't been allowed due to coronavirus restrictions at the time. Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kyiv, in Ukraine, to create the conditions needed for further talks. It follows negotiations in Turkey, which the sanctioned Chelsea FC owner Roman Abramovich attended. He was reportedly poisoned during the talks in Kyiv earlier this month, prompting Ukraine's foreign minister to advise his team not to eat or drink anything during the latest round of negotiations. A Ukrainian negotiator said enough progress has now been made to warrant a meeting of the two sides.
Intensive consultations are underway right now on some of the most important issues, the most important of which is the agreement on international security guarantees for Ukraine, because with this agreement, we will be able to end the war as Ukraine needs. The second, very important issue is a ceasefire to solve all the humanitarian problems that have accumulated. They all need an immediate solution.
Well, Ukraine's President Zelensky has told the Danish parliament that 100,000 people are still stranded in the southern port city of Mariupol. His comments came as new video emerged showing Russian tanks with distinctive Z markings heading towards the besieged city. Addressing the Danish parliament, President Zelensky called for tougher sanctions against Moscow.
We appeal to you and to the whole democratic world. The sanctions against Russia have to be strengthened. You must refrain from Russian oil. You must block trade with the Russian Federation. You must close your ports to Russian ships. This has to be the common policy of the European Union, of all the member countries.
Meanwhile, a Russian strike on an administration building in the port city of Mykolaiv was captured on CCTV. Local officials say 7 people were killed and 22 were injured in the attack. Rescue workers are still sifting through the rubble after the regional headquarters was targeted. Here, a £38 million super yacht has been seized by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, which is docked at Canary Wharf, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Russian ships were banned from UK ports at the start of this month. And Ireland has asked 4 senior officials at the Russian embassy to leave the country. The Foreign Affairs Ministry said it was because their activities had not been in accordance with international standards of diplomatic behaviour. The Russian embassy rejects the claim, saying it's an arbitrary claim and groundless decision which will only deteriorate relations between the two countries. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferry's claim that sacking 800 staff was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the Chief Executive said complying with the government's request to rehire the fired workers would cause the company's collapse. He told MSPs the minimum wage would be paid to all workers if the laws changed.
The route that runs between Scotland and Northern Ireland as a domestic route, we are required to pay national minimum wage, and we do pay national minimum wage, and we will continue to pay national minimum wage. And if that were extended elsewhere, we will completely comply with it. And this has not been about rates of pay. This has been about a fundamentally different model.
Pete Hebblethwaite. Downing Street has insisted that the Prime Minister didn't mislead Parliament when he told MPs no lockdown rules had been breached, despite a police investigation finding the law had been broken. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for parties which were held during lockdown at Downing Street. The Met Police say they'll be referred to the criminal office responsible for handing out fines. A dozen events were investigated, and the Prime Minister is thought to have attended as many as 6 of those. Scotland Yard says there could be more referrals in future. And that comes on the anniversary of the first heart painted on the National COVID Memorial Wall in London. Each painted heart marking a life lost to coronavirus. The COVID Bereaved Families for Justice group says it's clear the British public made sacrifices to protect people, while those at Downing Street broke the rules regularly and blatantly. You're with GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. More from Colin Brazier.
6 minutes past 5. It was perhaps the defining image of Britain's COVID crisis. Our newly widowed Queen sitting alone, wearing a face mask in Windsor last year. But today, Prince Philip got the send-off he should have had. A congregation of the great and good gathered inside Westminster Abbey for a memorial ceremony. But while the focus ought to have been on the Duke of Edinburgh's long life of service, much of the media's attention was on living royals. Prince Harry, who chose not to come and remember his grandfather's life, and Prince Andrew, who accompanied the Queen, a very public show of support for a royal prince in disgrace after his court settlement with Virginia Giuffre. But perhaps one story that didn't get the attention it deserved involved Keir Starmer, who, like Boris Johnson, was present at today's service. In an interview with LBC yesterday, the Labour leader broke with royal protocol and criticised the monarchy for its handling of the recent Caribbean tour by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. He suggested that Prince William should have gone further in condemning slavery, and he criticised the staging of the tour. Sir Keir said the image of an open-topped Land Rover driving past cheering West Indians was, quote, quite odd. Well, his comments will add to the sense that the Cambridge's tour of the Caribbean was a turning point for the future of the Commonwealth, the way the royals present themselves in public, and, as we were reminded today at Westminster Abbey, by the sight of our frail sovereign walking to her place, of monarchy's very future itself. Well, joining me, the historian Dr. David Starkey. David, welcome to you, and thanks so much for your time. What did you make of what Sir Keir had to say?
Oh, I thought it was very Starmer, I think is the best way of describing it. And again, that curious distance which Starmer has from reality. You know, here is a man who isn't quite sure whether women have penises or not. I thought there was an awful lot of that in what he said. I mean, the first thing about the tour of the Caribbean was it was by invitation. The scene with the Land Rover was clearly something that was arranged locally. Those involved were very, very proud of it. I agree, the echoes have an extraordinarily out-of-time quality. They were, after all, they were doing something which monarchy does. They were recreating an earlier event. And
in literally the same vehicle.
Literally the same vehicle. Literally the same vehicle. In other words, an earlier sovereign and a future sovereign. But that's what happens in monarchy all of the time. That's what monarchy is about. That's surely what human life is about. It's the way the past, the present, and the future talk to each other. But of course, Keir Starmer belongs to a different tradition. He wants break. He wants rupture. He wants inversion. Which is, why he's so uncertain about whether men and women can be distinguished from each other.
Well,
I'm not sure, but sorry, isn't it important? I don't really think that Starmer speaks for a majority, does he?
He may not even be speaking for himself, in the sense that he'll be mindful, surely, of a wing of his party which looks at the Queen through gimlet eyes and thinks, we'll keep quiet now. Yeah. But after she's gone, all hell will break loose. And these are people who look at the royal family as symbols, as emblems of a faded imperial glory and emblematic of colonial oppression.
I think it's more than that. And what it really is about is that instinctively somebody like Starmer is a Republican. The Labour Party, in its modern form, is instinctively Republican. And it's not simply, of course, that they see the monarchy in terms of colonialism abroad. They also see it in terms of class oppression at home. But again, should the monarchy, you seem to be suggesting, or at least those who wrote your script.
I wrote it. I wrote it, David Starkey. I wrote it.
I know you do yourself, but you're accusing Starmer of being ventriloquized. You're suggesting that because there has been this questioning, perhaps the monarchy should begin to reinvent itself. I think that responding to direct pressure is the last thing that the monarchy should actually do. We are coming to a huge change, Colin, the change of the end of a very, very long reign. A very long reign, which has also, despite the best endeavours of the Duke of Edinburgh, been fundamentally a very conservative reign. This is because the Queen herself is profoundly conservative. She came to the throne saying, I'm going to do it as my father did. And then in her first Christmas broadcast, she added, I'm going to do it as my grandfather did. So the fundamentals of the monarchy, in all sorts of ways, the investitures, the parading round hospitals, the charitable functions, the honorary colonelships of regiments, has not shifted since 1917. It's a century old, and a century that's seen this vast transformation. So there will have to be a rethink. There's another even bigger rethink coming, which we've all forgotten. We're going to replace a queen with a king.
Yeah,
that does change the way the things work. Do you see what I mean? There are fundamental changes coming anyway.
And I wonder. Maybe you saw. I read with interest Claire Foge's thoughtful piece in the Times at the start of this week, and she describes herself as a monarchist. But she says if this institution is going to survive, it's got to reform. It's got to get ahead of people like Keir Starmer, and he's a gentle critic. There are much more vociferous critics out there. It's got to certainly consider changing, if not even winding down, the Commonwealth. It's got to even look at things like, getting rid of a lot of the titles and slimming down the monarchy, etc., getting rid of wings of Buckingham Palace and turning them into centres for veterans or schools. But even things like the weekly audience with the Prime Minister, Claire Foge thinks, its time is done. But by the time you look down at this, you think, well, what's it for? As an institution, what's it for? If you get rid of all that stuff, what does it do?
The question it then becomes simply the ceremonialisation of charity. And I just don't think that works. The Queen herself, and I'm sure Prince Charles has this view too, the monarchy is, what is it for, Colin? Fundamentally, the monarchy is the celebration of the fact that we owe our freedoms not to a revolution, not to a specific act, not to something like the Constitution of the United States or the Bill of Rights. We owe our freedoms fundamentally to a long, stable, reforming history. And the monarchy is the symbol of that. It's the symbol of the success of what, of course, the left hates about Britain, our avoidance of revolution. So the idea of a dramatic rupture, which I think is what Claire Foge was talking about, is the last thing that should happen. The changes should be subtle. They should be quiet. They shouldn't be paraded. And above all, the last thing you do is wokeify the monarchy. What you've got to remember is people like Starmer are not genuine friends of the monarchy. The Labour Party is not a genuine friend of the monarchy. As we saw with Blair, it's a false friend. The last people who are interested in the monarchy are those who would see themselves as woke. And therefore, to adapt to the monarchy, to what they disapprove of, is the last thing you should do. By all means, the Commonwealth, was very much a particular, dare one use the word, fad of the Queen. It's also quite clear that the Commonwealth is separable from the notion of the royal role as head of state of the members of the Commonwealth. Most countries of the Commonwealth are republics. More of them will become republics. What it really is, and I think again, Colin, this is something very important. The Commonwealth is a unique testimony to the fact that the British Empire, in many of its respects, was a very good thing. Otherwise, why would the former members of the Commonwealth be so keen on maintaining a continued connection? You see, again, this is my problem with Starmer going on, the apology for slavery should have been much stronger. You see, I think that the moment you start apologising, and I do know it from my own personal history, you are giving hostages to the enemy. And I think what the monarchy, and indeed what we need to do, and by the way, Prince William can't be expected to do this by himself, and nor can the Prince of Wales, and nor should they. What we need to do as a country is to think harder about our history, harder about the empire, harder about our role in slavery. And what I think we need to start to do is to say, yes, Britain was the great slaving power of the 18th century. There can be no argument about that. That's simply because we're the top nation in the 18th century. But what is astonishing is the unique decision of Britain as a country. Not simply Quakers like my ancestors, not simply Methodists, but the establishment, the kind of people who were sitting there in the Abbey, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, the monarchy, all decided first to abolish slavery within the empire, and then consciously to destroy slavery in the world. In other words, this is a completely unique thing to do. Every previous civilization has used slavery. We are the only ones, Britain is the only one consciously to abolish it. And American blacks in the early 19th century constantly say there's only one country in the world that's on the side of the black, and that is Britain. Great
David Starkey,
with the
we've
weight
got to
of
leave
the
it there.
Navy.
I recommend if anybody wants to see a longer version of our conversation in a different form, we did it on YouTube 2-3 weeks ago, getting on for 200,000 people have listened in to what you had to say, not me. We appreciate you, as ever, Dr. David Starkey, thought-provoking, extremely. Thanks very much indeed. Cathy Gingell, briefly.
Prince William could do well to go for history tutorials with Dr. David Starkey and Professor Robert Toombs, so that we don't get such a selective view of history constantly being thrown at him and forced on him. OK. Imagine you're an older person and you are trapped inside your home, unable to summon help. This was the situation faced by thousands earlier this year in the wake of Storm Eunice. The storm was an act of God, but the inability to call for assistance was very much a man-made cock-up. Why? Because Storm Eunice did something which storms have been doing for years, namely bringing down power lines. But that wasn't the end of the world, because at least people who were cut off could use their landlines, couldn't they? Which run on old copper lines, old copper wires, to contact the outside world. But what happened after Storm Eunice was that many people no longer had access to their old landlines. BT had told them to switch to digital landlines, which rely on the internet and power. And when the power went down, digital didn't work. And in more remote areas, there was no mobile signal either. In Scotland, for instance, one man's home was burned down after the internet went down, and he had no mobile signal to call 999. BT has now said it's halting its great landline switch off, but not before causing huge amounts of needless anxiety. Elderly users of health alarms, for instance, which use landline technology to send alerts to monitoring stations, found they didn't work, nor older burglar alarms, which stopped working when the old copper lines were switched off. Crikey. Joining me, Harry Mount, editor of The Oldie. Harry Mount, welcome to you. Well, at least BT has listened.
Hello, Alex. I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Sorry, well, at least BT have listened, Harry.
Well, exactly, yeah. No, thank God it's at last they've listened to the common sense. And
It was striking during Storm Eunice. Several journalists, Charles Moore and Dominic Lawson, former editor of The Daily and Sunday Telegraph, lived close to each other in Sussex, where the storm hit very badly. And they both wrote articles saying, as you said, everything went. The power went, their mobiles ran down. And the only things that worked were candles and their landline. And Charles Moore's got a immobile mother living nearby. And it's only thanks to the landline that he could stay in touch. So the silly thing about BT was having this blanket removal of landlines. Here I am in North London. It'd be fine if my landline next door went. My mobile's fine. I could nip into my office to charge it if I lost power here. But in Wales, where my parents live, I've relied on a landline there for 40 years.
Should we see this through the prism of large British corporate entities who don't really give much of a fig about what happens in the countryside in isolated communities? Here it's BT. It might just as well be one of the high street banks who are closing down branches, leaving people to bank through the internet. Fine if you're 25, not so great if you're 75.
Exactly. So it's big companies thinking more of London than the regions, but also thinking so much more of the young than the old. There's still a huge amount of the old who depend on their landlines, and a lot of them don't use email or the internet. They have a much better time reading books. But so much of the world is aimed at the young and at the digital age, when actually it's only occasionally that the older analog systems work better in a crisis.
And isn't that, I mean, again, without sort of fetishizing old-fashioned stuff, we are thinking, I hope we're thinking a bit more about the resilience of our systems in the wake of COVID. I was on a Zoom call 3 weeks ago with farmers who are really concerned about food security for the same reason. They do not feel there's enough resilience built into a system, very fragile supply chains, just-in-time supply chains. And they say, 2-3 days, no food's on the shelves in the cities, and there's uproar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you're quite right. I don't want to fetishize the past despite being the editor of the oldie, but at the same time, what you can do is pick out the best of the past and work out where it still applies best. So I think it's right that BT from now on will ask people if they want to hold on to their landlines. An awful lot of people don't use them, and I think it's quite right that in some contracts you have to have a landline. I think that's wrong, but you give people the option and you hold on to the best from the past while adopting the best from the new as well.
Harry Mount, we've really enjoyed having you, as ever, to talk to us about a story that I'm sure interests many of your readers. And Cathy and I are now going to spend the next minute or so trying to work out what it is you have on your shelf behind you, because that's also generated.
Well, low gin, mostly.
Harry Mount, thanks very much indeed. Cathy Ginchel is alongside me. There was some salt, some Marmite.
I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about fax machines. Are fax machines dependent on landlines? Because people are using fax machines more for security.
Is that right?
Yes. I had an argument about this with somebody a while back.
You had an argument? You never say.
I looked it up on Google, and there's been an upsurge in the use of fax machines for absolute security of messaging because email and internet is so hackable. And so my question to Harry, if you'd allowed me, but I didn't warn you in advance because I didn't think about it, is are fax machines dependent on landlines? Because it's very important communication.
We'll get an answer for you. We'll get an answer, yeah. Cathy, thanks very much. Coming up very soon, the Met Police has announced 20 fines will be issued over alleged lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street and Whitehall. We'll get the latest on that with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. But first, it's time for the weather.
Hello again. Things turning an awful lot colder over the next few days. Icy in places, and yes, some spots could see some snow, particularly during Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Here's the reason why. A cold front is slowly drifting southwards. As it wriggles and ripples, we could see some snow during tomorrow evening and overnight, and then it clears away, meaning that we're all in the cold air by Thursday. Let's get back to the rest of today, however, because the cold air is pushing into the far north. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place here for the wintry showers overnight. It could turn quite icy. Mostly rain in this zone heading south across southern Scotland into northern England. The showers in the south fading. Temperatures here close to average, but further north with the colder air, there will be a pretty extensive frost across Scotland to start Wednesday. Still potentially icy across northern Scotland with more snow showers coming in here, mixture of sleet and hail at low levels. certainly some snow over the higher routes. And then this zone of wet weather sinking south through the day, so a dull damp start for Northern Ireland, Northern England, turning brighter later, the rain pushing into the Midlands and East Anglia, maybe turning to snow over hills in Northern England. Brighter conditions in the southwest, still quite mild here, but some afternoon showers, 12 or 13. Elsewhere, a big change, just 7 in Belfast compared to temperature in the teens here during today. The colder air continues to track southwards, and this is the area of concern during Wednesday evening and overnight. An area of wet weather across the Midlands, Southern England, South Wales that could provide some snow, certainly over hills, but even to lower levels for a time that may still be around on Thursday morning. So you may wake up to a covering across some surfaces on Thursday morning. It could be icy as well. That does tend to move out of the way, and then we're left with some wintry showers in the east. Again, a mixture of sleet, hail, and some snow, and some spells of sunshine, particularly in the west. But look at the temperatures come Thursday. 20 degrees last week. By Thursday, 5 to 8, and feeling colder when you add on that wind.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Remember PartyGate? 20 separate fines are going to be handed out over alleged lockdown-breaking parties held in government buildings. The Metropolitan Police said today that investigators will begin to refer the notices to the Criminal Records Office responsible for issuing the fine. Let's turn to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who joins us from Westminster now. Darren, hi to you, from Downing Street, actually. Do we know how much and who?
We don't, actually. We don't even know if it's 20 individuals. There were 20 fines, though it is possible that some people may have been fined more than once if they attended lots of different parties, and we believe there were lots of different parties inside Number 10 at the time. In terms of who they are, it is likely, we think, that they are more likely kind of civil servants at a more junior level. The government have made it clear that they would let us know if the Prime Minister had received a fine, so we don't think he's been involved in this initial batch of fixed penalty notices. In addition to that, there has been calls from some MPs, Colin, to see senior civil servants have their names outed, maybe even be forced to resign if they received a fixed penalty notice. But in terms of the individuals, as I say, we don't know if it is 20 or slightly fewer, simply because the Metropolitan Police is not prepared to reveal it. So unless it's leaked or they come forward, we're not going to find those names out. I think the concern, though, for Downing Street is this simply seems to be the first batch of potential penalties for rule breakers inside Downing Street and elsewhere here in Whitehall. The police are carrying on their investigations. They only sent out several more questionnaires in the last couple of weeks, and that is why I think you're right when you said at the top, do you remember PartyGate? It seems quite a long time ago now, doesn't it? Even though it was only a couple of months ago that Westminster was consumed by this story. But there is still danger for the Prime Minister, not least of all, as I say, because we are expecting the police to hand out more fines. If the Prime Minister was to receive one, the opposition and some of his own MPs have been clear, they think that would be a resigning matter in itself. And there are questions as well, Colin, about whether Boris Johnson has misled Parliament in what he said. Do you remember back in December, he essentially said there were no parties and that all the guidance was followed. That is clearly not now true to the degree that, with the police having handed out these fixed penalty notices, it is clear that laws were broken either inside Downing Street or at least at the very heart of government. So I think it is still pretty tricky territory for the Prime Minister, though clearly the conflict in Ukraine has given him some headroom.
Darren, thanks very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey there. Well, let's see what Cathy Gingell, my we call them presenters' friends but you are my friend, makes of this story. There isn't a parallel universe where we can see what happened to Boris where Ukraine didn't happen. We can guess, can't we, that he may have got into more and more trouble, or the media that Darren was describing, being fairly fickle beasts, and we are, would have moved on. We don't know, do we? We'll never know.
No.
It's impossible to know.
It would have moved on without doubt in this world that we're in. And I was just thinking, listening to the political reporter there, is that once we had ministerial responsibility and accountability and people resigned, and now we get fixed penalty notices. It's sort of absolutely symbolic of the state of our political culture today. And it's shameful and it's horrifying. Whether you agreed with lockdown or not, this government, this Prime Minister instituted it. The buck stops with him.
They'll get walloped. They'll get walloped to the May elections.
I don't think that's the point. I think if you look, our constitution depends on a notion of ministerial accountability and responsibility. And when that's gone, it is not enough. Yes, the election is the final point at which the punishment takes place. But before that, there's only been one resignation recently. It was Lord Agnew from the Treasury over the...
not exploring fraud cases enough.
The massive
writing
fraud
off the money.
Of the COVID furlough and business grants that the Treasury is making no effort to get back, and that people are paying for in their rising cost of living. We're being hit by it. We pay for it. These people keep on getting away with it. And sometimes the buck has got to stop to show that getting away with it can't happen. It's actually the Will Smith story over again. You hit somebody and you get away with it. Well, no, you shouldn't get away with it. And really, Boris Johnson has got away with it, really over PartyGate in an appalling way.
There are those who will say, I'm inclined to be one of them, actually, that our politicians are not some separate breed. They are drawn from the society from which they come. Their vices, their venality are our vices, our venality.
Well, no doubt they're a mirror of us, and we get the politicians we deserve. But I think once you drop those principles, that is part of it, because we've already dropped those basic principles. And then you're left in a mess when... that we're in fixed penalty notices. It's risible. It's risible.
I like that word. Can I apologise as well? I didn't get an answer to your fax question, whether they work on the copper wire. But I'll find out before the programme's over. Coming up this afternoon, the former Olympic swimmer Sharon Davis joins us to discuss the record-breaking male cyclist who now wants to shatter records as a woman. First, latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Queen and other senior members of the royal family have been paying tribute to the late Prince Philip at a memorial service in London. Queen Elizabeth was accompanied by her son, Prince Andrew, all the way from Windsor Castle to Westminster Abbey, and he walked her through the cathedral as well. The service of Thanksgiving featured elements the Duke of Edinburgh had planned for his own funeral, but hadn't been allowed due to coronavirus restrictions at the time. Russia says it will drastically cut its military activity in Kyiv and Chernihiv to create the conditions needed for further talks. It follows negotiations in Turkey, which the sanctioned Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich attended. A Ukrainian negotiator says enough progress has been now made to warrant a meeting of the two presidents. And here, a £38 million super yacht has been seized by the National Crime Agency. The vessel, docked at Canary Wharf, has been identified as belonging to an unnamed Russian businessman. Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 staff was necessary to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the chief executive said that the law would be complied with in all instances. And Downing Street has insisted that the Prime Minister didn't mislead Parliament when he told them no lockdown rules had been breached, despite a police investigation finding the law had been broken. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for parties which were held during lockdown at Downing Street. The Met Police says they'll be referred to the Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out fines. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier's back after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We're going to try and provide an answer to Cathy Gingell's question about the fax machine. I mean, there are really important burning questions around the world, as you know, right now, about COVID, Ukraine, all kinds of stuff, Cathy. But you just want to know whether you can use a COVID machine using Have we been drinking? No. We haven't, just for the avoidance of doubt. Can you use a fax machine? It's not talking pints. Can you use a fax machine using digital in the internet? No, you have to use an old analogue copper wire. You happy?
So that's another reason why we should keep analogues. That's another reason why the oldie editor has done everyone a good turn, isn't it?
Somebody's barking in my ear saying there are digital fax machines available should you want them, but that's basically...
I don't want a digital fax machine. I want to know that if the digital thing collapses and the satellite comes out of the sky, we have still an analogue...
And you told me during the break you still have your old fax machine hidden away for when the sky falls in.
For when the crisis comes.
Wow. Never had you down as a prepper, which is what they call preppers. They're preparing for the end of... We'll move on. Now, how quickly, serious news, how quickly could you complete 25 miles on a bike? Obviously, given the muscle power and long bone levers that requires, it does rather depend on whether you're a man or a woman. The quickest any British woman has finished 25 miles is 49 minutes and 28 seconds. It's a cycling record held by Hayley Simmons. By contrast, a teenage male cyclist, not even yet a fully grown man, completed that 25-mile course fully 2 minutes quicker than the quickest woman. That teenage cyclist was Zach Bridges, who set the national junior men's record in 2019 and was duly selected for British Cycling's Junior Academy. It's a fast track, we're told, to Olympic selection. Fast forward a couple of years and Zach has transitioned to Emily, and as Emily Bridges wants to compete against women, even though the athlete's body has been through a male puberty and, as a consequence, has much denser bones and muscle mass. Great news if you support the rights of transgender athletes, not so fantastic if you're the woman who's about to lose her place in the Olympic team to a cyclist who's broken records before as a man. Let's turn to the former Olympic medalist Sharon Davis, who has hesitantly, I imagine, Sharon, at times dipped a toe into the culture war waters of this one and been bitten, I imagine, on many occasions. So thank you very much indeed for agreeing to talk about it. It's sensitive territory for many people. What say you on this one?
It is very sensitive territory. However, we can have exclusion and fairness. We just have to put fairness first and kind of come up with a better solution. You know, if you look across Olympic sports, and obviously that includes cycling, you're looking at a 10 to 20%, even 30% in weightlifting difference, which is absolutely vast. And anyone that's gone through male puberty is not going to be able to mitigate against all those advantages. Now, at the moment, we spend millions trying to stop people from having the tiniest advantage by taking drugs so that they're cheating. But yet women are supposed to move over so that males can come into their sports and just give up their trophies, their wins, their places, their scholarships. It just seems so incredibly unfair, you know, whereas if we created an open category and a protected female category, everybody would be included, but everybody would also be able to have fair sport. And sport by nature is exclusionary. You know, we have the under-10s race.
You were really good at swimming, Sharon. Most of us are hopeless at it, you know?
Yeah, and some of us were good at it once upon a time and not so much nowadays. You know, that's the thing. But you're talking about female athletes that have given up absolutely years of their lives to be the very best they can be. Now, last week at the NC2As, which is the college championships in America, we saw an athlete called Leah Thomas who went from being over 500th in their particular race in the men's activities when they competed as a men up until they were 21 years old to #1 in the women's race, beating 3 Olympic silver medalists. I just can't see how that's mitigating. You know, if it was mitigating, you would come 500ths in the women's events as well as in the men's.
And obviously it varies from sport to sport. I mean, I was talking to somebody at the weekend about the amazing Cheltenham Gold Cup winner, woman jockey, competing on more equal terms. But, you know, where the long levers kick in, obviously Leah Thomas swimming, that counts hugely. The long levers that you need to excel in swimming, but also actually, I'm guessing that has to apply in cycling as well, doesn't it? Muscle mass,
yeah, well,
bone
cycling
density.
has what's called a Q angle as well, which is to do with your hips to knee. And in fact, women obviously having childbearing hips have a very different hip shape. So that's an advantage in cycling, which is never going to disappear, you know, if you suppress testosterone. But if you've had testosterone for 21 years of your life, you're really not going to be able to remove it ever. It's always going to give you an advantage. And I think that's the point. You know, is it fair to ask women to give up their rights to fair sport, whereas it doesn't work in the other direction. So you talk about trans athletes, those females that transition to be trans men will not impact men's sport at all, which again emphasises that there's a benefit to being biologically male.
One of the chilling aspects of this debate, it seems to me, is the utter reluctance to stare very solid and robust scientific evidence in the face. As you say, the advantage if somebody has gone through puberty as a male and what that does to their bone density and their muscle mass is ineradicable. It tails off a little bit when you stop taking, the hormone replacements kicking and all the rest of it. But there's a large benefit, as with other performance enhancing drugs, that never goes away. And that is, it seems to me, and you've read far more than I have, I'm sure, on the subject, a matter of scientific fact. And yet it's in play in this conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's 14 peer-reviewed studies out there that show that that so far nobody's been able to mitigate against the puberty advantage, the male testosterone advantage that male athletes have when they become transgender women. You know, and you say that when they're male, they will always be male They may be transgender women or transgender men, but they will still biologically be the sex that they are, and that can't actually physically be changed. So, yeah, I mean, it's just very frustrating that it seems to be women again that are pushed aside. And obviously, the reason I speak up so much is that I was around during the 70s and the 80s when we had the East Germans competing. And although obviously it was a very different process, they were fed male testosterone through puberty, they had a 9% advantage and they totally dominated the women's event. So in the 1980 Olympics, they won 90% of the women's medals in the swimming pool and less than 5% of the men's. You know, and this went on for nearly 20 years. And I just don't want to see another generation of young girls struggle.
And it's not victimless.
I had a mum.
Sorry, Sharon, it's not victimless. Do I misremember that you actually effectively would have got a gold, but you got a silver because you were picked by somebody who'd been on the drugs?
Yes, absolutely. And she's since admitted that she shouldn't hold the state record. And it was, it was all a matter of fact. When the wall came down in '89, all of the paperwork, all of the records were there for us to be able to see. And the IOC chose to do absolutely nothing because they would have had to admit that they didn't do anything at the time. But I have no problem with Petra Snyder in particular, because Petra was a young girl not given a great deal of choice. And in fact, she's very poorly because of the drugs that she was given. But I have a massive problem with the IOC, who let two groups of people down. And I see them just doing the same thing all over again.
Kathy Gingell's alongside me. He used to edit, it's changed its name now, The Conservative Woman, which tells you where you're coming from maybe on this, Kathy.
Well, it's the lie that's involved, that there's the idea that men and women are the same. They're patently not the same. So first of all, it's an egregious lie. Secondly, it's an egregious form of bullying. It's sort of almost beyond being unfair. This is an awful form of newly institutionalised bullying. And in this case, it's bullying of the female sex. But it's bullying of everybody in a way. It's so wrong that it's almost impossible to understand that it could have happened.
And Sharon, what do we say to those trans athletes who feel that they are being victimised, that they're going through a process that they feel society is smiling on, and why, therefore, shouldn't they compete in sports that reflect their new gender? Is there a way that we can accommodate all sides, or, as you say, actually, that there are just some tough lines here?
I think we can accommodate most of the way. There are certain areas where the biology just has to supersede. Things like sport, medicine, statistics, and some areas of safety as well is quite important, child safety in particular. But I think on the whole, absolutely, we can accommodate. And I absolutely support anybody who chooses to identify as the opposite sex. However, I will not believe that the biological reality does not exist. I'm not prepared to go that one step further. But I believe they absolutely need to be safe and they need to have the same opportunities. And that's why it's important that we have debate in sport rather than close it down by name calling, and why we come up with a better solution. And I've been involved in sport now at elite level for 50 years. And the best solution that I can come up with is an open and inclusive and welcoming category and a protected female category. When Leah Thomas won last week, not a single person in the swimming pool cheered. So I'm not sure that you can say that you enjoy that environment. Whereas when we had a transgender man who still chose to compete with the women, so even though that they identify as a man, they chose to compete with the women because that's where they stood a better chance of success. When that person finished, people were very appreciative and clapped and said congratulations. So I think that, I'm not sure that it does the trans community a great deal of favours, dislodging women's sports people, sacrificing a whole section of society and discriminating against them.
Sharon Davis, as ever, really good to talk to you and appreciate your perspective. Thanks very much indeed. Colin. Let's just get the thoughts of Kathy Gingell on this one. I'm glad Sharon brought up that picture from the podium, because sometimes people can get lost in this argument a little bit. A lot of our viewers and listeners are probably thinking, oh, crikey, it's all a bit abstract. I can't follow this story as closely as I should. But actually, when you see Leah Thomas first place on the podium, and the girls who gathered together on the other end of the podium didn't want anything to do with Leah Thomas.
Did you see the girl who had to step off? Was it in that swimming race or another? Just in the last week, she went up and she thought, but she actually had to come down again because they had given it to. I can't remember, but it's awful, and it's about you're changing the rules. It's not even changing the rules to accommodate a minority. It's changing the rules on the basis of a lie.
Though a lie that is disputed, we ought to say that.
A lie that, yes.
Kathy, we're going to move on. Cat lovers who are allergic could soon have a gene-edited pet which doesn't cause red eyes or sneezing, scientists in the United States have come a step closer to creating a hypoallergenic cat. They targeted a sticky protein called FeLD1. It's believed to cause up to 90% of allergies using a gene editing tool, which works like molecular scissors. Do love it when journalists try and come up with the right way of describing tough science. Works like molecular scissors. Researchers eliminated 2 genes which produce the protein. In the next 5 years, they hope to produce an anti-allergy pet. Dr. Maggie Roberts is the veterinary director at Cats Protection. Doctor, thanks so much for your time. A pair of, what was it, molecular scissors? I think we rather do down the science. Does it work? Is it going to be something that people can access?
Well, it's something that is quite far off at the moment. What the scientists have done so far is that they've done this gene editing in cat cells in a laboratory. So they've not actually done it with a live cat yet. And some people tried to do this about 20 years ago and it wasn't very successful. But that's not to say that this won't be. But I suppose we have to think about, by removing those genes, will there be any other sort of unanticipated effects on the cats? Because obviously it is permanently changing their genes, their DNA. And we don't know if actually there is a use for the FeLD1 protein from a cat's
presumably it wouldn't. Should it work? There's a big assumption. Should it work, it would continue to work in the future without continued genetic intervention. In other words, 2 cats that have been gene edited start to have kittens, and you create a new gene edited bloodline. Is that how that would work?
I think that's the theory of it. I have to say I'm not enough of an expert on that to actually confirm that. But that's in theory what should happen. Yeah, I think we have to think what if there may be negative effects on the cats. And there are other solutions. There's already a food on the market that has been proven to decrease the allergenic effect by about 50%, which means for quite a lot of people, that's enough to make them tolerate the cat. And also people can do things like, get rid of their carpets and have hardwood floors and do more vacuuming and have greater ventilation and things that, particularly if people are not extremely allergic, perhaps if it's mild, they can decrease the amount of allergens in the air, because basically the FeLD1 protein is in cat saliva, and when the cats groom, they spread it over their coat and it gets on their skin cells. So obviously that ends up in the environment. Yes, I think it's many years before we would see a cat that actually was born hypoallergenic, and I think we do have to think about the consequences.
I think I've got children who are dodgy with cats and they've got one in particular who's allergic to quite a few things. But can it be the case that somebody who absolutely loves cats develops an allergy in the course of having them? Is that not how allergies get to? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, some people will just start to become allergic after a certain amount of exposure. Certainly, I had a friend when I was at vet school who went before they started, didn't think they were allergic to cats and had been fine with individual cats. But when we did a class learning about cat handling and handling about 10 different cats, he puffed up. Like a rabbit with myxomatosis. So certainly people can develop them, but also different people will react to different cats differently. And it's not like breed related. People think there are certain breeds that are less likely to cause allergies, but that's not been proven to be the case. But some people will be fine with one cat and not with another because they have different amounts of that allergic protein in their saliva. So it's quite a complicated situation.
Well, we like explaining or trying to explain complicated situations. Maggie Roberts, really good of you to join us this afternoon. Thanks a lot. We're explaining a lot today, aren't we? Fax machines, no, cat saliva. Well, already on the show, we've spoken about the row over the Cambridge's Caribbean tour and the question some people say it poses about the future of the monarchy and Commonwealth. Earlier today, I spoke to the Telegraph author and columnist Tim Stanley for my latest podcast. Here's a little bit of what he had to say about it.
Sir Keir might be right. The thing about traditions is they have to start somewhere, and many of them are innovations, and over time they become pickled and they start to become just what that institution does. But if you go back to the beginning, you might realise that origin is very contextual and the context has changed. And therefore, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask if perhaps things have moved on. And I did think when I saw some of those images, I did think, that's imperial. Now, that doesn't personally offend me, but it may well offend former imperial subjects who are trying to throw off the monarchy. That said, I feel the whole story has been slightly blown out of proportion. Those protests, I'm sure, were small in number. Yeah. I'm sure they did not speak for everyone, and I'm sure some people rather like being part of the Commonwealth and enjoy having the having as their head of state a monarch. I say this as a Catholic. Most individuals have many different loyalties going on at once, a sort of a tapestry of loyalties. Loyalty to your family, to your wife, loyalty to your country, loyalty to your God. These different sort of sovereignties interact. And to me as a Catholic, well, the head of my church is the Pope, an Argentinian living in Italy. So it doesn't unnerve me at all to think of the head of my state being a foreigner who lives many miles away. Now, I understand, as I said, the historical context might well be one of slavery and imperialism, and therefore I understand why people might wish to revisit it and may want their independence. And crucially, the royals, who have been reduced to the status of going around the world telling people they're happy to be kicked out. It's a little bit sad. But the royals have said that. They've said this is a sort of elective monarchy. The nature of the monarchy has changed so dramatically that we are no longer saying we are here because we either have a divine right or because by the grace of empire we're in charge of you. They're saying we're here so long as you want us to be here. And it may be the people will change their mind. But as I say, as someone who themselves has a global identity as a Catholic, I would have no problem with the thought of someone being the head of the state who came from a different country.
Tim Stanley, fascinating chat. It'll be available in the next day or two on the usual platforms, Spotify and YouTube. I'm going to say thank you to Cathy Ginchel, who's been with me throughout the course of the last 2 hours. Any thoughts on today's news? 20 seconds.
Well, just I want to say William and Kate conduct themselves absolutely beautifully. They've got the best chance of anyone of continuing the monarchy. We need, as a country, something to cohere around. I doubt whether we'd do better than that. I just pray with David Starkey they don't get driven into wokedom too much, because that will be their end.
Nearly 1,800 of you have voted in our Twitter poll. It's only been going for an hour. Two-thirds of you, 65%, say God save King Charles. 31% say gone, the institution of monarchy, maybe its time is up after Elizabeth. President Johnson now 3.7%. Up next, Tubes and Co. Do stay with us.
Hello again. Things turning an awful lot colder over the next few days. Icy in places, and yes, some spots could see some snow, particularly during Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Here's the reason why. A cold front is slowly drifting southwards. As it wriggles and ripples, we could see some snow during tomorrow evening and overnight, and then it clears away, meaning that we're all in the cold air by Thursday. Let's get back to the rest of today, however, because the cold air is pushing into the far north. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place here for the wintry showers overnight. It could turn quite icy. Mostly rain in this zone heading south across southern Scotland into northern England. The showers in the south fading. Temperatures here close to average, but further north with the colder air there will